Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. Like always, I will be your host tonight, Mr. Dead Sleep. I'll be narrating 3 scary stories from some awesome and talented authors that I found on NoSleep Reddit. Right now, let's just get into it. Hope you enjoy. Our first story of the night is titled, I Bought a Used iPad. The notes tell a disturbing story. The iPad looked to be in pristine condition, almost as good as new except for a few scuff marks on the screen. Nothing seemed broken in, and the pictures showed it working perfectly. I knew as soon as I saw it that it had to be mine. Part of my brain told me that it was too good to be true. $40 for a new iPad in mint condition? Something's going on here. But the cheapskate part of my brain won over, and eventually I found myself setting up a meeting place for the purchase. Both me and the owner of the device agreed that the best place to meet up would be at his house, since it was fairly close to my place, and there was no good place to rendezvous between my place and his. He did give me some bizarre instructions for when I arrived at his house. His email told me to grab the iPad off the porch and slip the money under the doormat. When I attempted to ask him why he couldn't just come out and talk to me, he didn't respond. I should probably have had more doubts about the whole arrangement after that, but I was so blinded by such a good deal that I didn't bother asking any more questions. Soon enough, it came time to make the purchase. I drove the 15 minutes to his house, which was in a decent enough neighborhood. The lawns were all trimmed and the houses looked clean and well cared for. As soon as I pulled into his driveway, however, I could tell that my new business partner's home was the exception. There were weeds growing through the cracks in the sidewalk, and the front porch was covered in random junk like chairs, radios, and other assorted novelties. I wondered why the HOA wasn't onto his ass by now. As I neared the door, I noticed a putrid smell coming from inside. I made the executive decision to hurry up and get out of here as fast as I could. Resting upon the welcome mat was the glorious box that apparently held my new device. I pulled a $40 out of my pocket and slid the cash under the mat. Before I left, I called out, "Thank you." Then I booked it out of there and back to my house. The house just gave me a bad feeling, like something bad had happened or was about to happen there. As I was sitting down in my living room to open the cardboard box that stored the device, I noticed some words scrawled in large lettering on the bottom that I hadn't seen when I picked it up. "Check the Notes app," they read in a giant, messy handwriting. I was extremely confused by this, but I decided to put the red flags on hold in my mind as I pulled out the iPad. It looked just like the pictures had shown. It was in great working order and only had a few marks on the screen. I turned it on and swiped up to unlock it. I noticed right away that the device apparently had not been factory reset. The wallpaper was customized to a picture of an enormous black lab, and there were a number of apps downloaded that I was certain was not default iOS apps. I was about to go to the settings to reset the iPad when I remembered the words on the box. I decided, just for the fun of it, to check the Notes app. It probably was just a joke. The original owner was trying to pull one on me, but I decided to play along. I swiped over to the first screen with all the default apps like Photos and Maps and tapped on Notes. Immediately I saw there were 3 notes. The timestamps on each of them showed that they had been written at around the same time, about an hour before I had arrived at the iPad owner's house. I decided to read the notes in chronological order from the times that they were written. This is an exact transcription of what they said. June 12th, 2021, 12:17 p.m. I need to tell this to someone. I know that no one will believe me, and I'm not sure what good it'll be if you do. I'm too far gone by now anyway. I should probably start at the beginning. I was living a decently normal life. I spent most of my time at home with my dog Lacey, which you probably saw as my wallpaper. I worked from home and was perfectly happy. However, one day, I began to feel extremely odd. My ears would pop randomly and my mouth would dry up. As I was working, I found it harder and harder to concentrate on what I was doing. I'm a very focused person, so this is abnormal for me. My mind would wander to random things and I would lose my train of thought. I didn't think much of all this because I figured I would feel better the next day. But as the hours passed, the symptoms would get worse and I began to feel a headache. I went to sleep, hoping that rest would make it better, but the next day my headache had morphed into a pounding migraine. At times the pain would subside, but after an hour or so, the pain would always come back stronger. This went on for several days. I set up appointments with various doctors who each put me on some generic painkillers. None of the meds ever worked, and I was beginning to get desperate. I started vomiting frequently, and after a week, my vomit began to be mixed with blood. My sickness was progressing quickly, but no doctor or specialist could pinpoint a cause or a solution. All they ever did was give me a prescription for some drug that never did me any good. A few weeks into my illness, I began noticing some bizarre things in and around my house. I occasionally heard footsteps in the night, shuffling along the floor outside my bedroom. Once or twice I heard a raspy voice echoing from a nearby room. At first I attributed these weird happenings to my sickness and ignored them. They still unnerved me, but I didn't lend them much thought. All that I was concerned with was finding a cure. I couldn't think of any way that I could have contracted the disease. I hadn't traveled in a long time and I usually kept to myself. I wasn't able to work because of my symptoms, and life was miserable. I just wanted a way out. That was the end of the first note. I was somewhat confused, but I was also intrigued to see what happened next. I was still sure that it was a prank, albeit a written one. I tapped on the next note, wondering what happened in the next issue of this strange series of notes. June 12th, 2021, 12:38 p.m. Like I said, I didn't think much about the voices or footsteps. I tried my best to ignore them, and eventually they just blended in with all my other miseries. They just became another obstacle preventing me from falling asleep at night. Unfortunately, the sounds only got worse. The footsteps got louder and louder, and the voices became more and more frequent. The voice was raspy, and I couldn't tell if it belonged to a male or female, or if it belonged to someone old or someone young. It was an unidentifiable voice. The voice would say strange things. I couldn't understand half of its words, but what I could make out disturbed me. It told me that I was worthless. It said that my life only existed as sacrifice and that I should get up. It said that it was always watching me and that it was waiting for the right moment. What the right moment was, I may never know. I started to call my doctors and told them I was experiencing auditory hallucinations, but they still couldn't help me. I even talked to a psychiatrist who provided just as much assistance as everyone else I had consulted. Late on a Friday night, I was laying in bed trying not to vomit when I heard a noise come from outside my room. It sounded like glass shattering. I hadn't heard the voices of footsteps that night so far, but I figured it was just a hallucination. For some reason, however, I felt a strong compulsion to check. I was sure that the noise had come from my den, so I crawled out of bed just to look. It took me a while to get there. I was moving slowly and quietly because a part of me thought that this could have been a burglary. I couldn't hear anything out of the ordinary, so I continued on. Eventually I arrived in the den. What I saw shook me to my very core. There was my vase, which had been sitting on top of my end table mere hours ago, laying shattered on the wooden floor. I also knew for a fact that it couldn't have fallen off on its own, because I had placed it as close to the wall as I could in order to keep it secure. I called the police, but nothing came of their investigation. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing had been stolen or moved besides the vase. After that, I was paranoid. The noises kept coming back. Sometimes I saw things move on their own accord, just slightly, as if they had been nudged by the wind. I knew that couldn't be the case, however, since my windows were always closed and my air conditioner had been broken at the time. The illness was still increasing in severity, and I thought I was going crazy. My life was miserable. It had been over a month since my sickness started, and things were only getting worse. I considered taking my own life, but I held on to some small hope that things would get better. Soon enough, I started seeing things. At least, that's what I thought. At first, I was walking down my hall to the bathroom when I saw someone's back round the corner at the end of the hall. I ran after them, but they were gone. The corner rounds off into my kitchen, and there was no sign of the person there. Similar things started happening after that. I'd walk into my room to see someone jumping out of my window, or I would see someone slam the door to a closet as I walked past. When I'd investigate these appearances, whoever it was would vanish. I could never get a good look at the person. They seemed to be short, but I really couldn't tell, and they were always wearing white. I was fully certain that these were hallucinations. I didn't want to believe that I was going insane, but that was the only logical conclusion. I decided to try and photograph these incidents with my iPad. I would keep it in my hands at all times, and every time I saw something strange moving or someone walking around, I would snap a picture. None of these photos ever turned out. I still have them saved on the device you're reading this on. They look completely normal, like pictures of my hall or bedroom. I was living a nightmare. I was going completely insane. That was the end of the second note. By now, I was very unnerved. If this whole story was true, then why was this guy telling me this? It seemed a bit too bizarre to be real, but I decided to finish reading before making any judgments. I flicked over to the third and final note and began reading the final chapter of this strange series. June 12th, 2021, 1:04 p.m. I don't have much time, but I need to finish my story. I'd given up all hope of photographing the sightings. Instead, I did my best to ignore them. In fact, I gave up hope in general. I knew there wasn't much hope of me getting better. I had to quit my job because I was still sick and couldn't work. I was neglecting my poor dog Lacey. By now, I was resigned to my fate. I was sure I would die soon. I'm only writing this out because of what I saw yesterday. I had woken up in the dead hours of the night. My mouth was parched, and I decided to go grab a glass of water from the kitchen. I crawled out of bed, using my iPad screen as a light to find my way. As I stumbled groggily along, I began feeling very sick. I tried to hold back the urge to vomit and pushed on. As I was nearing the corner that turns off into the kitchen, I heard a sound coming from inside. It sounded like a raspy laugh or giggle. I shuddered, but I chalked it up to my hallucinations and entered the room. As soon as I stepped over the threshold into my kitchen, my heart dropped down into my stomach. I pulled up the iPad and took a picture of it, and this time, it finally turned out. I'm not totally crazy. You can see it for yourself. I think I'm being haunted. My hope is that by telling someone else, by sharing my experiences, I will have freed myself. I'm sorry if the ghosts have passed on to you. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. If they stay here with me, then at least someone else will know what happened to me. Once the sickness begins, there is no escape. Unfortunately, I feel that I'm too far gone anyway, but I still have hope. That was the end of the notes. I was extremely confused, and I had no idea what to think. This had to be fake. Just this guy trolling me. But I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt and check the Photos app, just to see what this mystery picture was. I left the notes and tapped on Photos. The gallery was filled with random pictures of doors, open windows, and hallways. These were presumably the pictures of the original owner of the iPad took when he saw those hallucinations. There was nothing abnormal about them, but the last picture was the terrifying one. The sight has given me nightmares. The picture shows a kitchen with the camera pointing at the fridge. The photo had clearly been taken with the flash turned on, as it showed the body of a girl lit up with artificial light. The girl was wearing a flowing white dress with lace on the collar. She was unnaturally pale and her hair was jet black. In her hands, the girl was holding a small cloth doll that looked like an exact replica of her with the same clothes, hair, and eyes. The eyes were definitely the creepiest part of the whole photograph. Her pupils weren't black, they were red, and they were staring straight at the camera. Needless to say, I factory reset the device that very day. I couldn't shake the sight of that girl. Every time I close my eyes, I see her staring into my soul. It's a horrible feeling. I decided that the entire story was a prank. The original owner of the iPad had written the whole story and photoshopped the picture just to scare me. I tried to go on about my life normally, but unfortunately, I think the man was telling the truth, and I think his plan worked, because I've recently started feeling very sick, and the usual meds won't cure it. I'm having trouble focusing. I've needed to take the last few days off work, and what's worse, factory resetting the iPad didn't work, because the picture of the little girl sitting on top of the fridge is still saved on the device. I have no idea what to do. Should I sell the tablet on Craigslist like the man did before it's too late? Or do I keep it here until I die, hoping that the ghosts die with me? I hope someone out there knows what to do. I'm running out of options. All right, that was good. We started out with a freaky one. Let's move on to our next story of the night. This one is titled, I Found Blood in My Apartment. I Finally Know Why. I was finally moved into my place on my own. I was working 2 jobs to afford it, but it was freedom I had never had before. I spent the first 6 years of my life moving to crack house with my mother and living in a group home until I was 18. I lived with roommates until I was 25 and was lucky to get this place. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor apartment in a 5-story building smack dab in the middle of downtown Phoenix. I'd never been so lucky in my life. 2 weeks later, I got the news that I'd won a full scholarship to Arizona University. Life was going so well. I admit it. It was tough working 2 jobs and going to school. But I knew it was temporary, and that one day I was able to work 1 job and get a house. I was determined to be happy. I lived in my new home for about 7 months when it started. I came home and noticed a drop of dark red liquid on the kitchen floor. I had pizza the night before, so I thought it was sauce. But when I wiped it, it looked more like blood. Maybe I cut myself or something. I dismissed it and went on with the evening. 2 days later, I woke up on my only day off in weeks and noticed the drop was back, in the very same place. I quickly cleaned it up. I made a thorough inspection of my body, looking for cuts and scrapes, but I only found a few bruises here and there. I chose not to think about it. I did not need anything added to my already full plate. About a week later, I came home from my second job to find a small puddle in my kitchen. Same spot. It was about the size of a golf ball and shaped like a bow tie. I inspected the ceiling after that. I looked for soft spots or stains and stuff like that. The vent was way too far for anything to drip out of and get anywhere where the liquid was. I was so tired though, so I cleaned it up and crashed into bed. I slept relentlessly. Over the next few months, the red liquid would appear randomly and in various amounts. I finally told a coworker, and she told me to take pictures and call maintenance the next time the puddle showed up. I grabbed my phone and took a picture. It didn't show the liquid. It was just a picture of my yellow-tiled floor. I rationalized it by saying it must have reflected the light and not shown up. but it disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. I had a couple days off and I was really looking forward to staying home and reading a good book, maybe even binge watch episodes of my favorite show. However, I woke up to the biggest puddle of the dreaded liquid I'd ever seen. I immediately searched through the junk drawer of the piece of paper with the number of maintenance on it and called. They said it could be a couple of hours, so I cleaned it up. I couldn't help but compare it to blood. It was the color, the thickness, even smeared like you'd see in a horror movie. I tried really hard not to think about that. A bearded man named Stuart arrived a few hours later. He looked tired, but cheerful. I told him what I was dealing with after telling him, I know this completely sounds bizarre. He agreed that it sounded very strange, but he was sure that there was an explanation for it. He got down on the floor and looked under the cabinets, the fridge, and the dishwasher. He didn't find anything. I felt some serious disappointment. He got up from the dishwasher and asked a few questions about when I saw the stuff and what it looked like. I felt like I needed to prove that the blood-like liquid was real, so I pulled a trash can out from under the sink to show him the paper towels that I used to clean it up. The can was full of paper towels, but not a single drop of red blood was on them. I could not believe it. I muttered something about invisible ink, and I swore that I was telling the truth. Stuart got his things and told me to call if something like this happened again. He was shaking his head as he walked out the door. I had no idea what to think. Was I going crazy? Was the stress getting to me? More likely my mother, who had some form of mental illness. Maybe this is why she got hooked on drugs. Maybe I was going down the same path. I shook my head. No, I was different. I was holding a 3.5 average in school, and both my bosses said they were happy with my work. I wasn't going crazy. The next few weeks flew by. Exams, busy season at work, and I'd met a girl named Erin from the first floor of my building. We had gone out on a few dates. I had forgotten about the evil red liquid until I came home from work one night to the floor covered in it. It looked like an animal had been slaughtered. I ran out of the apartment, ran downstairs to Erin's door. I told her the whole crazy story, and she suggested we get maintenance before going back up there. Stuart didn't look too annoyed that we were at his door and was willing to go with us back to my apartment. However, when we walked to the door, the kitchen was spotless. Not a single sign of red anywhere. I stared in disbelief and shock. I looked at the number on the door to make sure we were at the right apartment, even though it was my key that opened the door and my furniture inside. Stuart and Erin stood next to me, silent and awkward. I stammered out, "I'm not lying or crazy," but the evidence wasn't exactly backing me up. Stuart politely excused himself by saying his wife had dinner ready. He shut the door behind him, and I broke down into tears. I expected Erin to run out and ghost me, but to her credit, she didn't. She stayed and helped me dry my tears. However, we didn't talk about it after that. It was the elephant in the room when she was at my place. I almost hoped just one time Erin would see the blood too. Then came the horrific day, March 13th, but a Tuesday. I was almost done with school. I could see the finish line. Erin and I were getting serious, and she introduced me to her parents. We had just spent the day helping her sister move into her dorm when we were going home to shower and change our clothes. She walked into my apartment. The smell hit us as soon as the elevator doors opened. It was awful. I felt sick to my stomach. It was even worse in my apartment. I called Stuart, grabbed some clothes, and went with Erin back to her apartment on the first floor. The headline in the local paper read, 11 bodies found dead in serial killer's apartment. He had killed and dismembered at least 11 people and just left them on the floor of his kitchen. He was dubbed the bow tie killer because he had a significant amount of bow ties in his closet. His kitchen was directly above mine, and since tiles can't soak up blood, it dripped into my floor. Every time I left to go get maintenance, he would delete and replace my pictures and clean out all the blood and replace my paper towels. He was a quiet neighbor and I only saw him once or twice by the mailboxes. Poor Stewart helped me with the cleanup and told me everything. I had nightmares for a week, but still felt some relief. I moved in with Aaron a week later. They had to completely gut his apartment to get rid of that smell. And let's move into our last story of the night. This one is titled, "This is not a drill. This is my last call. I repeat, this is not a drill message." This is Lieutenant Jonathan Reginald Anderson, serving in the United States Army, serving in the Brigade of Research Team B1344. This is not a drill message, and if you can read this, this is my last message to you, and a fatal one at that, as it is my last way to contact the population of all North American and South American people. I have been part of an international top-level security alliance consisting of European and American forces, located on a small island near Point Nemo in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Said island is not archived on any publicly accessible records, so I will spare you that detail. I can't get into much detail because my time is limited. I'm trapped underwater, and my cabin is slowly filling with water far below the freezing temperature. If I'm lucky, I might have an hour, likely no more than 10 minutes. All you need to know is that in 1969, we weren't on the moon for the first time. The first moon landing was 1968, in winter, by Soviets. But once they landed, both Soviet forces and our forces lost contact and visual signal. The last signal we interfered was the WOW signal, which we later reproduced in 1977, but it was covered up. Apollo 11 was never tasked with the first moon landing, but with the recovery of intel. But they returned without any intel, only with a black, gooey mass confined in one of the cosmonauts' helmets. There it was sealed shut, until a few minutes ago. I've seen it tear through the flesh of my colleagues, melt their skin off like acid, and feast in their bones like an orc. I have no idea what it is, and I frankly don't care. I just hope the water drowns me before I face this nightmare. Whatever it is not vulnerable to fire, acid, or bullets. It lives without oxygen and eats without nutrients. Maybe it's photosynthesizing, the way each ray of light just vanishes in its dark eyes, as black as the goddamn rest of that formless body. God, I don't even know if those even are eyes. Whatever it may be, and however it may look, it doesn't matter. It broke confinement, and it will reach the shore eventually. We are drifting toward South America, so I assume the people in Santiago de Chile will be the first major city to get a notice about it, unless the Chilean government tries to cover it up for its presumably short remaining time in office now. Buy groceries, barricade your door, and gather your loved ones. Once it's ashore, the Americas are done for. I assume it will not re-enter water and live from the natural resources of North and South America, so Europe, Asia, Africa, and Oceania are presumably safe. To all Americans, this is not a drill. President Joe Biden is informed and is taking steps to confine it on the American continent. Whatever it is coming. It will get you. And you cannot run. You cannot hide. You cannot fight. Gather your loved ones for your last hours. My air is running tight. It won't be in the 5G towers, not in the water or your food, not in the vaccine. It will be in your blood. God bless the USA. God bless all you brave, damned fools. And that was our final story of tonight, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening. I'll be back soon with a new group of scary stories. But in the meantime, if you'd like this video and subscribe, it would mean a lot as I'm trying to grow this channel. Once again, I am Mr. Dead Sleep, and good night.